They'd been buddies forever. Inseparable. Hilda took his hand silently. Lester looked at him with increasing incredulity. You don't mean that, Lester? If we split, it would break my heart. There wouldn't be a day that went by from now to the end of time that I didn't regret it. But if we keep going down this path, it's going to cost me my soul. I'd rather be broke than evil. Oh, it felt so good to be saying this. To finally affirm through deed and word that he was a good person who would put ethics before greed, before comfort even. Lester looked at Hilda for a moment. Hilda, this is probably something that Perry and I should talk about alone, if you don't mind. I mind. Lester. There's nothing you can say in front of her. Lester apparently had nothing to say to that, and the silence made Perry uncomfortable. Lester had tears in his eyes, and that hit Perry in the chest like a spear. His friend didn't cry often. He crossed the room and hugged Lester. Lester was wooden and unyielding. Please, Lester. Please. I hate to make you choose, but you have to choose. We're on the same side. We've always been on the same side. Neither of us are the kind of people who send lawyers after kids in hospital. Never. I want to make it good again. We can have the kind of gig where we do the right thing and the cool thing. Come on, Lester. Please. He let go of Lester. Lester turned on his heel and walked back into his bedroom. Perry knew that meant he'd won. He smiled at Hilda and hugged her. She was a lot more fun to hug than Lester. Sammy was at his desk looking over the production prototype for the Disney in a Box units that Imagineering had dropped off that morning when his phone rang. Not his desk phone, his cellular phone, with the call return number blocked. Hello, he said. Not many people had this number. He didn't like getting interrupted by the phone. People who needed to talk to him could talk to his secretary first. Hi, Sammy. Have I caught you at a bad time? He could hear the sneer in the voice and then he could see the face that went with the sneer. Freddie. Shit. He'd given the reporter his number back when they were arranging their disastrous face-to-face. It's not a good time. Freddie. He said. If you call my secretary. I just need a moment of your time. Sir. For a quote. For a story about the ride response to your printer's Your Disney in a Box Circle R. TM. Circle C. Sammy felt his guts tense up. Of course those ride assholes would have known about the printers. That's what press releases were for. Somewhere on their message boards he was sure that there was some discussion of them. He hadn't had time to look for it. Though, and he didn't want to use the Disney Parks competitive intel people on this stuff, because after the Death Waits debacle on debacle. He could be such a fuck up, he didn't want to have any train of intel gathering on the group pointing back to him. I am not familiar with any response. Sammy said. I am afraid I can comment. Oh, it'll only take a moment to explain it. Freddie said and then launched into a high-speed explanation before Sammy could object. They were delivering their own 3D models for the printers, and had even gotten hold of one of the test units Disney had passed out last week. They claimed to have reverse-engineered the goop that it ran on, so that anyone's goop could print it. So, what I am looking for is a quote from Disney on this. Do you condone this? Did you anticipate it? What if someone prints an AK-47 with it? No one's going to print a working AK-47 with this. Sammy said. It's too brittle. AK-47 manufacturing is already sadly in great profusion across our inner cities. Anyway, as to the rest of it, he closed his eyes and took a couple of deep breaths. As to the rest of it, that would be something you'd have to speak to one of my legal colleagues about. Would you like me to put you through to them? Freddie laughed. Oh come on. Sammy. A little something on background. No attribution. You going to sue them? Have them beaten up? Sammy felt his face go white. I am sure I don't know what you're talking about. Word has it that the Death Waits kid came up with this. He used to be your protege. No, and I hear that Kettlewell and Jan have been kicked out of the organization. No one around to call the lawyers out on their behalf. Seems like a golden opportunity to strike. Sammy seethed. He'd been concentrating on making new stuff, great stuff. Competitive stuff, to be sure, but in the end, the reason for making the Disney in a Box devices had been to make them as cool as he could imagine. To plus them and re-plus them, in the old slang of Walt Disney, making the thing because the thing could be made and the world would be a more fun place once it was. Now here was this troll egging him on to go to war again with those ride shitheads. To spend his energies destroying instead of creating. The worst part. It was all his fault. He brought his own destruction, the reporter. Death waits, even the lawsuit. All the result of his bad planning and dumb decisions. God, he was a total fuck up. Disney in a box sat on his desk. Humming faintly, not humming like a fridge hums, but actually humming in a baritone hum, humming a medley of Magic Users songs from Disney movies, like a living thing. Every once in a while it would clear its throat and mutter and even snore a little. There would be happy rustles and whispered conversations from within the guts of the thing. It was ploused all the way to hell and back. It had been easy, as more and more Imagineers had come up with cool features to add to the firmware, contributing them to the versioning system, and he'd been able to choose from among them and pick the best of the lot, making a device that rivaled Walt's 1955 Disneyland itself for originality. Excitement, and cool. I'll just say you declined to comment. Then, asshole. You write whatever you need to write. Freddy. He said. A hatch opened a tiny bit on the top of the cube and a pair of eyes peered out, then it slammed shut and there was a round of convincing giggles and scurrying from within the box. This could be huge, if Sammy didn't fuck it up by worrying too much about what someone else was up to. Oh, and one other thing, it looks like the Death Waits kid is going to be discharged from the hospital this week. He wasn't ready to leave the hospital. For starters, he didn't walk yet, and there were still times when he could barely remember where he was, and there was the problem of the catheter. But the insurance company and the hospital had concurred that he had all the treatment he needed even if his doctor hadn't been able to look him in the eye when this was explained and it was time for him to go home. Go away. Go anywhere. He put it all in his LJ, the conversation as best as he could remember it, the way it made him feel. The conversation he had with Perry and the idea he had for PWing Disney in a box. He didn't even know if his apartment was still there. He hadn't been back in weeks and the rent was overdue. And the comments came flooding in. First a couple dozen from his friends, then hundreds, then thousands. Raging fights. Some people accused him of being a fakest or sock puppet aimed at gathering sympathy or donations, side conversations, philosophical arguments. Buried in there, offers from real world and online friends to meet him at the hospital, to get him home, to take care of him. It was unbelievable. There was a small fortune, half a year's wages at his old job, waiting in his PayPal, and if this was all to be believed, there was a cadre of people waiting just outside that door to meet him. The nurse who came to get him looked rattled. Your friends are here, she said in her Boris and Natasha accent, and gave him a disapproving look as she disconnected his hoses and pipes so swiftly he didn't have time to register the pain he felt. She pulled on a pair of Salvation Army underpants, the first pair he'd worn in weeks, and a pair of new, dark blue jeans and a Rotary picnic t-shirt dated 3 years before. The shirt was a small and it still hung from him like a tent. You will use canes? She asked. He had some physiotherapy that week and he could take 1 or 2 doddering steps on crutches, but canes? No way. I can he said, picturing himself sprawled on the polished concrete floor, with what was left of his face bashed in from the fall. Wheelchair, she said to someone in the hall, and an orderly came in pushing a chair with a squeaky wheel, though the chair itself was a pretty good one, at least as good as the ones they rented at Disney, which were nearly indestructible. He let the nurse transfer him to it with her strong hands in his armpits and under his knees. A bag containing his laptop and a few cards and things that had shown up at the hospital was dumped into his lap and he clutched it to himself as he was wheeled to the end of the corridor and around the corner, where the nurse's station, the elevators, the common area and his fans were. They weren't just his pals, though there were a few of them there, but also a big crowd of people he'd never met, didn't recognize. There were goths, skinny and pale and draped in black, but they were outnumbered by the subculture civilians. Normal-looking, slightly hippie-ish, old and young. When he hove into sight, they burst into a wild cheer. The orderly stopped pushing his chair and the nurse rushed forward to shush them sternly, but it barely dampened the calls. There were wolf whistles. Cheers. Calls, disorganized chants, and then two very pretty girls he hadn't thought about pretty anything in a long time unfurled a banner that said death waits in glittery hand-drawn letters, with a little skull dotting the I in waits. The nurse read the banner and reached to tear it out of their hands, but they folded it back. She came to him and hissed in his ear, something about getting security to get rid of these people if they were bothering him, and he realized that she thought death waits was a threat, and that made him laugh so hard he choked, and she flounced off in a deeply Slavic huff. And then he was among his welcoming party, and it was a party. There were cake and clove cigarettes in smoke savers and cans of licorice coffee, and everyone wanted to talk with him and take their pictures with him, and the two pretty girls took turns making up his face, highlighting his scars to make him fit for a Bela Lugosi role. They were called Lacey and Tracy, and they were sisters who went to the ride every day, they said breathlessly, and they'd seen the story he described, seen it with their own eyes, and it was something that was as personal as the twin language they developed to communicate with one another when they were little girls. His old friends surrounded him. Guys who marveled at his recovery, girls who kissed his cheek and messed up Tracy and Lacey's makeup. Some of them had new tattoos to show him. One girl had gotten a full leg piece showing scenes from the ride, and she slyly pulled her skirt all the way up, to show him where it all started. Security showed up and threw them all out into the street, where the heat was oppressive and wet, but the air was fresh and full of smells that weren't sickness or medicine, which made death waits feel like he could get up and dance. Effervescent citrus and biodiesel fumes, moist vegetation and the hum of lazy high noon bugs. Now, it's all arranged. One of the straight-looking ones told him. He figured out that these were the pure story people, who read his descriptions and concluded that he'd seen something more than anyone else. They all wanted a chance to talk to him, but didn't seem too put out that he was spending most of his time with his old mates. Don't worry about a thing. Car after car appeared, taking away more of the party. Here you go. Another car pulled up, an all-electric kneeling number with a huge cargo space. They wheeled the chair right into it, and then two of the story hippies helped him transfer into the seat. My mom was in a wheelchair for 10 years before she passed. A hippie told him. He was older and looked like an English teacher death waits had quite liked in grade 10. He strapped death waits in like a pro and off they went. They were 10 minutes into Melbourne traffic death, marveling at buildings. Signs. People, in every color, without the oppressive white and gore colors of everything in the hospital. When the English teacher dude looked shyly at Death. You think it's real, the story? I mean, don't you? Death thought about this for a second. He'd been very focused on the park in a box printers for the past week, which felt like an eternity to him, but he remembered his obsession with the story fondly. It required a kind of floaty non-concentration to really see it, a meditative state he found easy to attain with all the painkillers. It's real, he said. The English teacher and two of his friends seemed to relax a little. We think so too. They pulled up to his condo. How they know where he lived, and parked right next to his car. He could see where the tow had kind of fucked up the rear bumper, but other than that, it was just as he remembered it, and it looked like someone had given it a wash. 2. The English teacher put his car in park and came around to open his door just as the rest of the welcoming party came out of his building, pushing a stair-climbing wheelchair. The same kind that they used in the ride. Death laughed aloud with delight when he saw it rolling toward him, handling the curb easily, hardly a bump, and the two pretty girls. Tracy and Lacey transferred him into it, and both contrived to brush their breasts and jasmine-scented hair across his cheeks as they did so, and he felt the first stirrings in his ruined groin that he'd felt since before his beating. He laughed like a wild man, and they all laughed with him, and someone put a clove cigarette between his lips and he drew on it, coughed a little, and then had another drag before he rolled into the elevator. The girls put him to bed hours later. His apartment had been spotless and he had every confidence that it would be spotless again come nighttime. The party had spent the rest of the day and most of the night talking about the story that they'd seen in the ride, where they'd seen it, what it meant. There was a lot of debate about whether they had any business rating things now that the story had shown itself to them. The story was the product of unconscious effort, and it should be left to unconscious effort. But the counter-argument was that they had a duty to garden the story, or possibly to sharpen its telling. Or to protect it from people who couldn't see it or wouldn't see it. At first Death didn't know what to make of all this talk. At first he found it funny and more than a little weird to be taking the story this seriously. It was beautiful, but it was an accidental beauty. The ride was the important thing, the story was its effect. But these people convinced him that they were right, that the story had to be important. After all, it had inspired all of them, hadn't it. The ride was just technology, the story was what the ride was for. His head swam with it. We've got to protect it, he said finally, after listening to the argument, after eating the food with which they filled his fridge, after talking intensely with Tracy, or possibly Lacey, about their parents' unthinking blandness, after letting the English teacher guy, whose name was Jim, take him to the toilet, after letting his old goth pals play some music some mutual friends had just mixed. We've got to protect it and sharpen it. The story wants to get out and there will be those who can see it. He didn't care that his speech was mangled by his fucked up face. He'd seen his face in the mirror and Tracy and Lacey had done a nice job in making it up. He looked like a latter-day Marilyn Manson, his twisted mouth a ghoulish smear. The doctors had talked about giving him another series of surgeries to fix his lip, a set of implanted dentures to replace the missing teeth, had even mentioned that there were specialist clinics where he could get a new set butted and grown right out of his own gums. That had been back when the mysterious forces of the lawsuit and the ride were paying his bills. Now he contemplated his face in the mirror and told himself he'd get used to this, he'd come to like it, it would be a trademark. It would make him gothier than goth, for life, always an outsider, always one of the weird ones, like the old-timers who'd come to Disney with their teenaged, eye-rolling kids. Goths' kids were never goths, it seemed more like bang-bangers or jockey-looking peak performance types, or hippies or gippies or dippies or tippies or whatever. But their parents were still proudly flying their freak flags, weird to the grave. We'll let everyone know about it, he said, thinking not of everyone but of all the cool subculture kids he'd grown up with and worshipped and been rejected by and dated and loved and hated, and we'll make it part of everyone's story. We'll protect it. Guys. Of course we'll protect it. That settled the argument. Death hadn't expected that. Since when did he get the last word on any subject? Since now. They were following his lead. And then the girls put him to bed, shyly helping him undress, each of them leaning over him to kiss him good night. Tracy's kiss was sisterly, on the cheek, her spicy perfume and her jet black hair caressing him. Lacey's kiss was anything but sisterly. She mashed her breasts to his chest and thrust her tongue into his mouth, keeping her silver eyes open and staring deep into his, her fingers working busily in his hair. She broke the kiss off with a gasp and a giggle. She traced the ruin of his mouth with a fingertip, breathing heavily, and let it slide lower, down his chest. He found himself actually hard. The first pleasurable sensation he'd had in his dick since that fateful night. From the corridor came an impatient cough. Tracy, waiting for Lacey to get going. Lacey rolled her eyes and giggled again and then slid her hand the rest of the way down, briefly holding his dick and then encircling his balls with her fingers before kissing him again on the twist of his lips and backing out of the room, whispering, "Sleep well, see you in the morning." Death lay awake and staring at the ceiling for a long time after they had gone. The English teacher dude had left him with a bedpan for the night and many of them had promised to return in rotations indefinitely during the days, helping him out with dressing and shopping and getting him in and out of his marvelous chair. He stared and stared at that ceiling, and then he reached for his laptop, there beside the bed, the same place it had lived when he was in the hospital. He fired it up and went straight to today's fly-throughs of the ride and ran through them from different angles, facing backward and sideways, looking down and looking up, noting all the elements that felt like story and all the ones that didn't, wishing he had his +1-1 joystick with him to carve out the story he was seeing. Lester wouldn't work the ride anymore, so Perry took it on his own. Hilda was in town buying groceries. His chest freezer of gourmet surplus food had blown its compressor and the contents had spoiled in a mess of venison and sour blueberry sauce and duck pancakes, and he stood alone. Normally he loved this, being the carnival barker at the middle of the three-ring circus of fans, tourists and hawkers, but today his cast itched. He hadn't slept enough, and there were lawyers chasing him. Lots of lawyers. A caravan of cars pulled into the lot like a Tim Burton version of a funeral, a long train of funny car hearses with jacked-up rear wheels and leaning chimney pots, gargoyles and black bunting with super bright black light LEDs giving them a commercially eldritch glow. Mixed in were some straight cars, and they came and came and came, car on car. The hawkers got out more stuff, spread it out further, and waited while the caravan maneuvered itself into parking spots, spilling out into the street. Riders got out of the cars, mostly super skinny goths. A line of special low-calorie vegan versions of Victorian organ meat delicacies had turned a mom-and-pop cafe in Portland, Oregon, into a Fortune 500 company a few years before in elaborate DIY costumery. It shimmered darkly, petticoats and toppers, bodices and big stompy boots and trousers cut off in ribbons at the knees. The riders converged on one of the straight cars, a beige minivan, and crowded around it. A moment later, they were moving toward Perry's ticket-taking stand. The crowd parted as they approached and in Perry saw whom they'd been clustered around. It was a skinny goth kid in a wheelchair like the ones they kept in the ride. They'd get that every now and again, a guest in his own chair, just needing a little wireless +1, box. His hair was shaggy and black with green highlights, stuck out like an anime cosplayer's. He was white as Wonder Bread, with something funny about his mouth. His legs were in casts that had been wrapped with black gauze, and a pair of black pointy shoes had been slid over his toes, tipped with elaborate silver curlicues. The chair zipped forward and Perry recognized him in a flash. Death waits. He felt his mouth drop open and he shut it and came around the stand. No way, he said, and grabbed Death's hand, encrusted in chunky silver jewelry, a different stylized animal skull on each finger. Death's ruined mouth pulled up in a kind of smile. Nice to see you, he said, limply squeezing Perry's hand. It was very kind of you to visit me in the hospital. Perry thought of all the things that had happened since then and wondered how much of it, if any, Death had a right to know about. He leaned in close, conscious of all the observers. I am out of the lawsuit. We are. Me and Lester. Fired those guys. Behind his reflective contacts, Death's eyes widened a touch. He slumped a little. Because of me. Perry thought some. Not exactly. But in a way. It wasn't us. Death smiled. Thank you. Perry straightened up. Looks like you brought down a good crowd. He said. Lots of friends. Death nodded. Lots of friends these days. He said. An attractive young woman came over and squeezed his shoulder. They were such a funny bunch in their DIY goth frocks, micro-manufactured customized boots, their elaborate tattoos and implants and piercings, but for all that, cuddly and earnest with the shadows visible of the geeks they'd been. Perry felt he was smiling so broadly it almost hurt. Rides are on me. Gang. He said. In you go. Your money's no good here. Any friend of Death Waits rides for free today. They cheered and patted him on the back as they went through, and Death Waits looked like he'd grown 3 inches in his wheelchair, and the pretty girl kissed Perry's cheek as she went by, and Death Waits had a smile so big you could hardly tell there was anything wrong with his mouth. They rode it through 6 times in a row, and as they came back around for another go and another, they talked intently about the story, the story, the story. Perry knew about the story, he'd seen it, and he and Lester had talked it over now and again, but he was still constantly amazed by its ability to inspire riders. Paying customers slipped in and out, too, and seemed to catch some of the infectious intensity of the story group. They went away in pairs, talking about the story, and shopped the market stalls for a while before coming back to ride again, to look for more story. They never named the ride. It had always been the ride. Not even a capital R for a second. Perry wondered if they'd end up calling it the story in the end. Perry got his Disney in a box through a circuitous route, getting one of the Hawkers brothers to order it to a P.O. box in Miami, to which Perry would drive down to pick it up and take it back. Lester roused himself from the apartment when Perry told him it had arrived. Lester and Suzanne had been AWOL for days, sleeping in until Perry left, coming back after Perry came back, until it felt like they were just travelers staying in the same hotel. He hadn't heard a peep from Kettlewell or Jan, either. He guessed that they were off figuring things out with their money people. The network of ride operators had taken the news with equanimity. Hilda had helped him write the message so that it kind of implied that everything was under control and moving along nicely. But when Perry emailed Lester to say he was going to drive down to the P.O. box the next morning before opening the ride, Lester emailed back in minutes volunteering to come with him. He had coffee ready by the time Perry got out of the shower. It was still dark outside. The sun not yet risen, and they hardly spoke as they got into the car, but soon they were on the open road. Kettlewell and Jan aren't going to sue you, Lester said. There it was, all in a short sentence. I've been talking to them. I've been figuring out if I am with you or with them. I've been saving your ass. I've been deciding to be on your side. Good news, Perry said. That would have really sucked. Perry waited for the rest of the drive for Lester to say something, but he didn't. It was a long drive. The whole way back, Lester talked about the Disney in a box. There'd been some alien autopsy videos of them posted online already, engineers taking them to bits, making guesses about and what they did and how. Lester had watched the videos avidly and he held his own opinions, and he was eager to get at the box and find answers for himself. It was the size of an ice chest, too big to fit on his lap, but he kept looking over his shoulder at it. The box art, a glossy pic of two children staring goggle-eyed at a box from which Disneyoid marvels were erupting, looked a little like the make-your-own monster toy Perry D had as a boy. It actually made his heart skip a beat the way that old toy had. Really, wasn't that every kid's dream? A machine that created wonders from dull feedstock. They got back to the ride long before it was due to open, and Perry asked Lester if he wanted to get a second breakfast in the tea room in the shantytown, but Lester begged off, heading for his workshop to get to grips with the box. So Perry alone waited for the ride to open, standing at his familiar spot behind the counter. The hawkers came and nodded hello to him. A customer showed up. Another. Perry took their money. The ticket counter smelled of sticky beverages spilled and left to bake in the heat, a sour sweet smell like bile. His chair was an uncomfortable bar stool he'd gotten from a kitchen surplus place, happy for the bargain. He'd logged a lot of hours in that chair. It had wreaked havoc on his lower spine and tenderized his ass. He and Lester had started this as a lark, but now it was a movement, and not one that was good for his mental health. He didn't want to be sitting on that stool. He might as well be working in a liquor store. The skill set was the same. Hilda broke his reverie by calling his phone. Hey, gorgeous, she said. She bounded out of bed fully formed, without any intervening stages of pre-coffee, invertebrate, pre-shower, and Homo erectus. He could hear that she was ready to catch the world by the ankle and chew her way up its leg. Hey, he said. Oh, Mr. Bad Vibes is back. You and Lester fight in the car. Nah, he said. That was fine. Just, he told her about the smell and the stool and working at a liquor store. Get one of those home slices running the market stalls to take over the counter, and take me to the beach. Then. It's been weeks and I still haven't seen the ocean. I am beginning to think it's an urban legend. So that's what he did. Hilda drove up in a bikini that made his jaw drop, and bought a pair of polarizing contacts from Jason, and Perry turned the till over to one of the more trustworthy vendors, and they hit the road. Hilda nuzzled him and prodded him all the way to the beach, kissing him at the red lights. The sky was blue and clear as far as the eye could see in all directions, and they bought a bag of oranges, a newspaper, beach blankets, sunblock, a picnic lunch, and a book of replica vintage luggage stickers from hawkers at various stop points. They unpacked the trunk in the parking garage and stepped out into the bright day, and that's when they noticed the wind. It was blowing so hard it took Hilda's sarong off as soon as she stepped out onto the street. Perry barely had time to snatch the cloth out of the air. The wind howled. They looked up and saw the palm trees bending like drawn bows, the hot dog vendors and shave ice carts and the jewelry hawkers hurriedly piling everything into their cars. Guess the beach is cancelled, Hilda said, pointing out over the ocean. There, on the horizon, was a wall of black cloud, scudding rapidly toward them in the raging wind. Shoulda checked the weather. The wind whipped up stinging clouds of sand and debris. It gusted hard and actually blew Hilda into Perry. He caught her and they both laughed nervously. Is this a hurricane? She asked. Joking. Not joking, tension in her voice. Probably not. He was thinking of Hurricane Wilma, though.